Next up is Peter Thompson, a former colleague of ours here at Unitec, but now a senior lecturer in media studies down at Victoria University. Peter has written extensively on the government's broadcasting policies since 1999 and chaired the working party which revised the TVNZ Charter in response to public submissions. Recently down in Wellington he has co-organised the Forum on the Future. Gosh, we seem to gravitate towards the same terminology. No, this is good. This isn't a brand that Adidas or anybody else could sell. Yet. On the a Forum for the Future on public television. So, Peter, a few highs, high and low in terms of public broadcasting from your point of view.
Well, I probably have less history here than many of my co-guests. I arrived in New Zealand in 1997. I guess the first low was turning on the television for the 6 o'clock news. Oh my God, is that it? I was horrified. It was parochial, it was trivial, it had 15 minutes to 20 minutes of advertising, and there was virtually no analysis. There was work to be done here, I thought. And sure enough, there's a lot of work that's needed doing. I was really quite concerned. It's the first developed country I've been to that had news and current affairs that was really so thin in terms of its emphasis on any analysis of politics, of economics, of deep cultural issues. You know, it was trivia. And people accepted it as quality news. Now, I'm sure it was high quality in terms of generating revenue, making profits for the broadcasters. But in terms of public service, gee, it was the pits. So one of the highs, of course, was learning that after the 1999 election, Labour had a very new vision for public broadcasting and talked about reintroducing a charter. TVNZ would become a public service institution. Well, that sounds jolly good, I thought. Well, once I saw the plans, I actually wrote to the government and told them, well, this is actually a bit more complex than you're supposing. You can't throw $15 million at a $300–400 million broadcasting institution and expect it to become the BBC overnight. Sure enough, it didn't. So there have been highs and lows in this regard, and I guess the highs of the Charter were probably the recognition that the notion of public service broadcasting needed to be expanded beyond the idea of mere provision of local content. Local content is absolutely important, but public service as a broader concept needs to be expanded beyond that. I was also thrilled when TVNZ6 and TVNZ7 were created. The government had always maintained that we couldn't possibly afford a commercial-free, standalone public service broadcaster, and we got two. They may not have been mainstream, but I thought they were very important because the texture of the schedule that they offered was markedly different from anything else that we saw on the commercial programs. Now, of course, in the middle of this, Ian Fraser had resigned as CEO of TVNZ, lamenting the fact that commercial pressures had resulted in a schedule that was completely incompatible with any recognisable model of public broadcasting. And therein lies some of the problems, that at the same time as we try and do wonderful things with broadcasting in New Zealand, there are countervailing forces that push us back to this rather staid, rather tired, completely dysfunctional commercial model. And I'm not condemning commercial broadcasting in its entirety. There's a huge amount of commercial broadcasting that I enjoy as a person and things that are good for society. But simply to rely on a commercial model to provide everything that we expect from public broadcasting in a democratic and a cultural sense is sheer folly. And there's 60 or 70 years of solid academic research that would back up that assertion. And I'm terribly afraid that what we've seen both under Labour governments and under the current national government is politicians that do not listen, and they do not base their policies on facts. And there's some reasons for that I'll probably go into later. So that was a big low, coming to understand why that might be the case.
just to try and calibrate this in an international scale, this kind of low you hit on the 6 o'clock news, how do you think that might compare with, say, a network affiliate in somewhere like Little Rock, Arkansas?
Well, I suspect you'd find more comparisons there than with the BBC. It's probably one of the reasons that many people in television news won't talk to me anymore. Unfortunately, that's not because I'm lying. It's because I'm putting things in context. Yeah. And it's not all their fault. There are plenty of good television journalists in New Zealand, but they're not resourced to do the job that they'd often like to do. And therein lies the difficulty. I'm not condemning the people responsible for this. They're doing an excellent commercial job. The problem is there's another job to be done, and that needs to be funded properly. And that's where I go in this debate.
Right, yeah. Thank you. Now, Terry represents very much doing that other job. And Terry's career in broadcasting started marvellously when she joined Radio Hauraki just as it came ashore. And she was telling me earlier that Radio Hauraki was the only pirate radio boat out there that actually managed to convert to a licensed broadcaster, unlike sort of Radio Caroline and the UK ones, which just kind of ran out of business. But after some years in radio, Terry was saying she got pretty frustrated with that, and then ranged widely around advertising and other areas of the creative industries, frustrated by the commercialization of radio. But then 19 years ago got involved with Planet FM, our neighbours just here to us here in Unitec, where Terry's broadcast manager. Planet FM dates back to 1987 when the Auckland Ethnic Council founded a radio station so that non-English speaking communities could hear their own languages and their own news and music and literature. And so the station is thus well established and now has broadcasts in some 50 languages. And we'll come back to the commercial model for how you make that work in a moment. But in terms of what you've been seeing over those years in community access radio and public broadcasting, some highs and lows.
Very exciting medium from my point of view, from all the other areas that I have worked in. Probably the most fun and the most challenging. And I think that just of late I've been ploughing through applications from about 250 applicants for a job on the station from today's young graduates, and what's coming through is that they are looking for postings in media that has meaning. And I think that's part of what we set out to do, that the media that we make is meaningful for people. Community access radio does not have an editorial policy. And that's a very powerful tool. It's a management challenge, and clearly we have to obey civic and broadcasting law, but there's nothing to say you can't pursue The Secret Life of Frogs or the revolutionary poetry of an Urdu philosopher. And so diversity is us, and the whole glorious mishmash of human ideas is in there. And currently we're broadcasting in about 45 languages. It's been up to 52. Our job is not just to be the multilingual broadcaster. That's one of the things that Planet FM does, but to be the voice of our various communities. And there are 12 access stations around the country, all very different in character because of the communities they represent, and so they represent those different viewpoints. The sort of best and most exciting things that come out of it, from my point of view, is to hear a woman from the very small Jewish community that's in New Zealand, not as big as you would find in Europe or the States, saying, when I turn on the radio, I know we're here. So people have a sense of place and visibility. It's great to be told by a Romanian broadcaster that their community was virtually created out of their radio show. A couple of former broadcasters from Romania getting together, putting on a show, knowing themselves and about 3 other members of the community, and discovering that scattered throughout Auckland there was a much larger community that started to gravitate and focus around that 1 hour. And from that radio show has emerged a community magazine, a children's language and culture school, a church community. So virtually the community came into being as a result of gravitating around an hour of radio a week. It's great to be told when you go into a hardware store by a young 20-something English speaker, I listened to that radio station. When asked why, it's like making a journey around the world without leaving home. So there's things like those people so horribly named mental health consumers who actually make their own radio program, have their own voice and tell it like it is. The show is called Take It From Us, and they do that job so well in such a meaningful way that they get a couple of National New Zealand Radio Awards for their work. It's great to hear a young Korean hip-hop fan coming onto the station, very, yo, and the whole thing. He's opening the lines, putting on the beats, and letting the kids from the street rap their own story straight down the phone. So it's a very live, very real voice from the street. That becomes something that he develops into a recording company that he's now marketing that music around the world, and has created a clothing line and so on. So he's actually filtered all of these things, which is a mixture of Korean and Pacifica and English rap straight from the street to the radio and then out to the world. And it's kind of exciting for us to know that as non-English broadcasters have started to become active in the market, like with Pacific Radio and Indian Radio and so on, that we still get a constant stream of applications from those communities, because the commercial model still completely stymies their ambitions to represent their communities. It's still music, ads, news break, if you're lucky, and they still want to be able to have that non-editorial environment where they can speak for their communities and about the issues that are vitally important to them. And to have programs like the Dutch and Irish communities, who are long established in New Zealand, doing programs of literature and language and keeping alive the culture of their homelands and passing it on to third and fourth generations here in New Zealand. So there's just this great stream of the community coming through and building around the radio shows. I guess the work of it would be, the hard part of it, the worst of it would be that the funding model means that the only people who have to pay for their own media are those who are least able to pay, shall we say, least able to pay. A kind of mindset out there that would keep us as a kind of cake stall operation. We're incorporated societies, but not being taken seriously, and no ambition being applied to that model, that it could be bigger and a more vital link. And the kind of marketing 101 classes that sort of suggest that surveys designed for advertisers are the only place that you're ever going to learn anything about the nature and value of audiences and what they are worth to the media at large. And in a kind of way, I think sadly, especially amongst the English-speaking community, the idea that the existing model or the dominant model is the only model. We recently hired a young man who had been to a broadcasting school, and when I asked him what he'd learned about public service broadcasting, he said he didn't know that such a thing existed. And that there was no mention made of it in his course. Now, this is not a 4-year degree course, it's one of the shorter courses, but to him this was all news.
It wasn't one of my courses.
It wasn't one of your courses, indeed. Yeah. From my own point of view, as a media user, I think my worst moments are the tabloidisation of news and, in fact, of a great deal of programming. There's just no depth and everything turns into a headline that is sort of shocking or sensational but has no depth. A kind of complete failure of television to deliver a public service good these days. I think historically it had some place there, it no longer does. A statement heard by me in the presence of the Chief Executive of Television New Zealand, when asked about the apparent surrender of television programming to the youth market, he replied that people over 50 will watch anything, which shows you how much thought has gone into that subject. And the best in a fairly barren landscape, I guess, is besides Community Access Radio, Al Jazeera Television and the BBC World Service Radio, of course, is Radio New Zealand National, I think. And possibly the worst is the emerging idea that pointing a camera at radio constitutes public service television.